Hello everyone. Welcome to our English conversation program. Today we are very delighted to invite you to join us again for the guest hour. This month we are very happy to have Miss Gillan Hepworth with us, who is the Libraries and Books Advisor of the British Council in Tokyo.
Hello everyone. It's very nice to be back with you. We hope you enjoy listening to Miss Hepworth today.
Welcome to our program, Miss Hepworth, and it's so nice of you to come.
I'm delighted to have been invited. Hello, everybody.
Well, Miss Hepworth, the first 15-minute program, we would like to focus on your personal background, and the next Saturday, for the second half, we would like to devote our discussion to the professional side of your career. So could I start off by asking about where you grew up and perhaps about your good old school days?
Yes, I was born in Huddersfield in Yorkshire in the north of England. It's a medium-sized town with quite a lot of industry. I spent the first 18 years of my life there until I went to university, going, of course, first to junior school, and then I went on to a grammar school for 7 years. I seem to remember that I hated wearing the school uniform, which we all were forced to wear, and I suppose that children here feel the same way.
I suppose you went on to university after that. May I ask about your college life?
Yes, I didn't travel very far to university. It's about 15 miles from Huddersfield to Leeds, but I hardly ever went home when I was in Leeds. I studied German and did a 3-year course there, but spending 1 year in Germany in between. I lived out in digs and looking after myself in my final year, so I was never mollycoddled in a hall of residence, as some students are. Then after my university, I went on to study librarianship, again in Leeds, at the College of Commerce.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask, when you were living in an apartment, did you share it with other girls or were you by yourself?
We all had individual rooms in one very large house, which had been a hall of residence. So we had communal cooking facilities, but we all had our own study bedrooms.
I see.
And you just mentioned that you'd gone to another institution to study librarianship, and what was the name of that institution again?
I studied at the Leeds College of Commerce, as it was then.
And is it part of the University of Leeds, or...?
No, it's actually part of the... Well, now it's part of the Leeds Polytechnic, but the College of Commerce was run by the local authority in Leeds, whereas the university is run on a national basis.
I understand that in British English the term college and university are not interchangeable as they generally are in the United States. Would you mind elaborating on this a little bit?
That's a very difficult question. We've got about 46 universities in Britain. And they are universities. We also have the polytechnics, which give degree courses. Below them tend to be the colleges of further education, colleges of art, colleges of music, often but not always teaching to non-degree level.
Would these be 2-year or 4-year institutions?
Usually perhaps it would depend, 2 or 3 years. Because there is a problem in that if you go to Oxford or Cambridge, you do actually belong to a college. And London University is made up of several different colleges, Birkbeck College, Queen Mary College, but they are all really universities in their own right. So the term college is used in very many different ways in the British educational system.
I see. It sounds confusing.
And back to talking about university life, not college life, then. You seem to have spent 1 year in Germany as a teaching assistant. And It sounds like an exciting experience, and could you tell us a bit more about it?
Yes. When I was looking around for universities to go to, I didn't want to go to a university which forced you to spend a year abroad. But by the time I'd got to Leeds and been studying for 2 years, I thought it would be a very good idea to spend a year abroad, because it's only that way that you actually learn the language. We'd studied the literature, we'd studied the grammar, but getting to know spoken German, I thought it would be much more useful to go abroad. So there was a scheme whereby we could go and teach in a school. And this I did in Osnabrück, which is in the north of Germany, a very nice old town. And I had a very, very nice time, 9 months there.
What type of school were you in while you were teaching?
It was called a middle school, and the children there were from about 11 years to 15, something like that. I was supposed to give English conversation classes, but the pupils' knowledge of English wasn't really up to conversation, so I tended to have to actually give the English lessons, which was a bit difficult.
And how did you find the students there in terms of their personality? Are they friendly, open-minded, or shy, as most of the Japanese high school students? Or
No, they were friendly. There was a certain problem of communication, but then I had the German, so that if their English wasn't enough for us to converse in English, then I could always converse in German. And if things went a little difficult, well, then I put on a record, or we played a game, something like that. But it was a very useful and very pleasant experience.
May I ask how many students there were in a class?
As I recall, quite large.
what was it?
Perhaps between 30 and 40, but it's a long time ago now, so I don't really remember.
But it's not at all quite large for the Japanese standard.
Really?
30 or 40 seems to be the average.
Well, for somebody who hadn't done any pedagogical training, standing up in front of 40, 11-year-old little German boys was very daunting.
Oh, it was a boys' school.
No, it was mixed, but I seem to have had boys' classes, as I recall.
Well, I understand then that you studied off with German, but that now you've become a librarian. So may I ask what motivated you to become interested in librarianship?
I didn't really know what to do when I left university. After my year in Germany, I knew that I didn't want to teach. So what was open to somebody with a degree in German? Then, after my finals, the final examination at the university, I worked in the university library. And I thought, here's something which interests me. I'd always used libraries from being a tiny child, but I'd never thought about working in them. But that interested me enough to apply for a place at library school.
So you worked in the library for about a year before you...
No, I just worked in the summer vacation.
Oh, I see.
And then I managed to get a grant to go and study librarianship at the Leeds College of Commerce. Otherwise, I would have probably had to go and work for a year and finance myself, or thereafter get a grant to study.
And I wonder, what are some of the minimum requirements or qualifications to be a professional librarian then? I don't think, it's the sort of thing that everybody can just walk in and become over the night.
No, not these days in Britain. Anybody used to be able to go in straight from school, the age of 16, work their way up, taking examinations as they progressed through the different levels. But nowadays it's become a graduate profession. So either you go to university and study librarianship itself, or information science for 3 or 4 years, or you take a degree, as I did, in any subject, it doesn't matter, and then go on to do a postgraduate course, an MA or a diploma. Not so many PhDs in librarianship.
But then how long would that program take, 1 or 2 years?
The postgraduate course is usually 1 year.
I see.
Yes.
Then to change the subject slightly, I understand that you've lived and traveled in South and Southeast Asia as well. Could you share some of your travel experiences and living experiences with us?
I suppose I've been very lucky that I worked my way around the Bay of Bengal with the British Council, starting off in Thailand, where I lived for 10 months. Then I moved to Bangladesh and was there for 18 months. And thereafter I was in Sri Lanka for 3.5 years, so literally around the edge of the Bay of Bengal. It was fascinating to compare and contrast lifestyles.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, in terms of it being South and Southeast Asia, perhaps we think of it as being all very similar. But of course it isn't. A country like Bangladesh is Muslim, whereas Sri Lanka and Thailand are Buddhist countries. And you've got Thailand never having been colonized, whereas, of course, there's a British history in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. That appealed to me. But there's so many different memories that one has, one particularly in Sri Lanka, when we climbed to the summit of Adam's Peak, which is a holy mountain. You climb during the night and watch the dawn rise from the summit. An unforgettable experience.
Oh, it's just like climbing the Mount Fuji.
I suppose so. I'd like to do that sometime, yes. Perhaps when the snows have gone.
And in those countries, did you have any difficulty communicating with the local people? I mean, did you have any interesting experiences about your language problem?
Not really. I've always tried to learn the language of the country, but it hasn't been easy. There's always been the fact that they haven't used the Latin alphabet, and so one's had to learn a different alphabet. In Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, there were usually no problems because a lot of people had been educated in the English medium, especially the older generation. In Thailand, it was slightly different, and knowledge of Thai was needed to travel around and to buy things in the markets.
So do you think you can just get by somehow in Thai language after living there for some time?
After 10 months, I wasn't very proficient, but I didn't starve, and when my car ran out of petrol, I managed to fill up at the gas stations. So it was adequate, but I couldn't read and write it.
I understand that you're interested in drama and photography and also traveling around the countryside. Would you tell us more about your hobbies?
Yes, on the drama side, I'm interested in it as a spectator. Drama in England, the theatre in England is very good. And when I was in England, before coming to Japan, I used to go to the theatre a lot. But I'm quite interested also in being a player.
Oh, did you ever act in it?
Just a little, in amateur theatrical groups. I was even in a film in Sri Lanka, but it was a very, very minor part. In fact, I don't think I spoke in it at all. Photography, well, I've been in such beautiful countries, but it's been a joy to photograph the sights there. I'd like to be able to develop my own films, but I haven't got round to that yet. Perhaps I will in Japan. I'm sure it's possible to do that here.
I'm sorry, have you ever displayed any of your photographs?
No.
I see.
No, I've bored friends with slideshows, but it's private, really, not public.
Well, Miss Hepworth, I really hate to say this, but we are running out of time today. I'm sure our listeners would like to hear more about your career experiences. So would you mind coming again next Saturday to talk to us?
Not at all.
Well, everybody, this concludes today's guest hour, and I hope you enjoyed being with us. So long.
Bye.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our English conversation program. Today, we're extremely happy to present the second half of this month's guest hour, in which we'll be continuing our discussion with Miss Gillan Hepworth.
Hello, everybody. Yes, we're certainly delighted to have Miss Hepworth from the British Council back with us again. A very special welcome to the second half of our guest hour. For the benefit of those who were unable to join us last week, let me briefly tell you what we talked about. Ms. Hepworth is the Libraries and Books Advisor of the British Council in Tokyo. Last week, we heard something about her educational background, her travel experiences, and her hobbies. This week, we'd like to hear a little more about her professional career. Welcome back to the program, Ms. Hepworth.
Thank you very much for inviting me again. Hello, everybody.
I'd like to begin by asking what the main functions of a public library are.
I think that these days nobody can afford to buy all the books and journals that they need, either for their work or their study or leisure activities. So a public library can serve all those requirements. It can provide recreational reading, whether it's fiction or biographies or whatever your interest might be. And it doesn't just provide them by having books on the shelves in the main library or the branch libraries, but it takes the books actually to the readers in its travelling libraries. People who are housebound, for instance, can still read books because the library comes to them rather than they go to the library. Then the public library can also provide information, commercial information, information as to how to pass your exams, information of all kinds, sometimes from books, these days often using online services and Prestel services. And also public library can provide a quiet area for study and also provide the books necessary.
You mentioned the term online services. Could you explain that just a little bit?
This is a term we use for access to computerized databases, the provision of information in an automated form.
I see.
And I just heard you saying something like people housebound, and what do you mean by that? Probably our listeners don't quite understand.
The term housebound refers to usually elderly people who can't walk about very much, or, for instance, young wives tied to the house with children, or people who are sick. So anybody who is tied to the house.
I see.
Not literally, but...
Thank you. And since you work for the British Council, Ms. Hepworth, I wonder what some of the most important services your library offers are.
Well, should I say that, first of all, that we have two libraries in Japan, the main library being in Tokyo and a branch library in our regional directorate in Kyoto. Unfortunately, we don't have any offices elsewhere in Japan. So if you're living outside of those areas, then you'll have to telephone us or write to us. We'll always lend you books by post. If I can talk about the Tokyo Library, we've got about 20,000 volumes in it, and we subscribe to about 180 periodicals and newspapers. We take the Times and the Sunday Times and the Observer. We also have a lot of audiovisual materials. Cassettes, videos, records, films, film strips. Most of the books and journals and audiovisual materials can be borrowed.
Oh, that's very nice.
Institutions, organisations are the only ones we allow to borrow the audiovisual materials, but otherwise anybody over the age of 18 can come and borrow books and journals. In addition to that, we do, of course, provide information on Britain and things British. If you're interested in studying English in Britain, come along and see us, and we can give you advice on which schools of English you might attend. If you're interested in doing further studies in Britain, again, we can provide you with information.
And is the membership open to everybody?
Yes, if you're over the age of 18.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. And could you make some comparisons, say, between the use of the British Council Library here in Japan and in other countries?
Yes. Our library here is very heavily used for information.
Mm-hmm.
People will telephone us, call in, or write and ask for information. So that the actual borrowing of books is probably less than in certain countries. Membership is lower, and the number of books per member that are borrowed per year is lower than in other countries, where the British Council Library is often used as a surrogate university library.
Earlier you said something about if you do not live within the Tokyo or Kyoto area, you can borrow books by post. How would someone in the audience who's interested in doing that go about that? Simply write a letter to you?
Yes, first of all, they'd have to go through the formality of actually joining. Mm-hmm. So we'd send them a membership card through the post. Mm-hmm. We now produce accessions list, a list of the new books that we've received, so they could receive that to know what we are getting into the library. But you can always write in and say, have you got a particular book, or have you got material on a particular subject? And we'd be glad to send the books through the post to you.
When we check out a book, how long can we keep it?
I believe it's 4 weeks.
Oh,
I don't often sit at the issue desk and stamp out the books myself, but we do allow you to renew as well. And any number of books you can take out at one time.
Oh, there's no limit on the number?
There's no limit. No, we're very generous.
Do you have any advice or suggestions about a good way to use the library?
If we're talking about libraries in general, one thing to remember is always to be specific in any inquiry that you might have. Too often people come into a library and ask a very general inquiry when what they really want is the answer to something much more specific. And it does waste a lot of time if you have to gradually find out what the reader really wants, or what the inquirer wants. So be specific. And another thing which is important is to observe the regulations. All libraries have regulations, whether it's about the length of time you can keep a book out, or whether you should smoke or not smoke in the library. And I do think it's a courtesy to observe the regulations.
Yes, I quite agree. And Ms. Hepworth, I understand each library has its own, say, specific purpose and characteristics which stem from its purpose. So could you tell us about different types of libraries and the kind of services they are most likely to offer?
I've said a few words about public libraries, and they probably have the most difficult task because they never really know what their clientele is. It can be school children, it can be the housebound, as I said, it can be businessmen wanting information. So they have a very wide remit. Other libraries, such as school libraries, or academic libraries, or even what we call special libraries, have a much more limited clientele. The school library serves the school, the university library serves the university. The special library would serve the factory that it's in or the business firm. But they're all there to offer information for further study or for manufacturing goods in a better way.
One of the main services which any library is supposed to offer, I guess, is the constant supply of current information. I wonder how librarianship is related to information science.
Yes, it's a little difficult. Librarianship came first, of course. We think about the origin of the term librarian from the Latin liber, a book. So librarians have always conserved printed records mainly. They have exploited them, they've collected them, they've catalogued them, classified them, so that you and I, anybody else, can come in and find what they want. Information science is a fairly new phenomenon and tends to be concerned with the actual provision of information.
Mm-hmm.
It could come in book form, it could come in journal form, it could be in a technical report. But it's knowing where information is and providing it to the person who needs it.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more positive in some ways than librarianship.
And it may be difficult to generalize, Miss Hepworth, but what do you think is the most crucial or important part of a librarian's job?
It's been said rightly that libraries are for users. And I think we've always got to remember that. Librarians are there to serve. It's no point having a library where all the books are neatly classified and catalogued and look very nice on the shelves if nobody comes in. So a librarian has to be aware of his or her users and make the collections available. It's a service, in my view.
It seems to me that in Japan, people are likely to buy books rather than borrow them from libraries. Would you like to comment on the practice in other countries?
Yes, well, working as I do in the Kanda Jimbo-cho area, I can't fail to notice the bookshops and the interest in books, and everybody in the subway seems to be reading books. I think books in Japan are comparatively cheap, certainly compared with those in Britain. So it's probably as easy to buy books here as it is to borrow them. And we in Britain have a long history now of public libraries. So we've rather grown up borrowing books from our early childhood. And I think this makes a difference.
In Britain, since you said that we've grown up that way, how are children encouraged to make the best use of libraries?
A lot of public libraries now have special programs for children. They have, first of all, their own children's libraries. And then they organise story hours, and they organise games and quizzes, and they help the children with their research projects for schools. So there's great emphasis on bringing the children into the libraries and showing them the wonder that can be found in books.
And at about age do you think children are encouraged to start using libraries in England? Do you have any idea? Maybe.
I suppose that their mothers can borrow very simple books for them when they're tiny tots. I suppose school-going age, really, 4 or 5. But I remember going to the library as a very small child.
Well, Ms. Hepworth, just to conclude the program, what type of information, may I ask, once again, is available at the British Council libraries?
Information about Britain, of course, about English language teaching, about education in Britain. Anything that you would like to know about Britain and the British, do come along. We'll be happy to serve you.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Miss Hepworth, and I'm sure our listeners enjoyed every single minute of this program, and I certainly hope you will have another chance of talking to us. And thank you very much again for being with us.
It was my pleasure talking to you.
Everyone, this concludes today's guest hour, and be sure to join us again. Till then, goodbye.
Goodbye for now, everybody.